Is Frank Gore a Hall of Famer? We will discuss that and more on tonight's episode of the Hammerheads Show. Hello, everybody. It is Monday night, which means it's the Monday night episode of the Hammerhead Show. I am Jack Hammer of the Santa Rosa Press Democrat, and with me, as always, on Monday is Rob Shue, and that's the part where we get the heads from because he's the sneakerhead. I'm the Hammer, so we throw those two together. We get the Hammerhead Show. How you doing, Rob?
I'm doing very well. Very well. Thank you, Jack.
All right, so we've got a fun show lined up tonight. I know we're definitely going to get into the topic that everybody seems to be blowing up today, which is Frank Gore, and will he or will he not end up in the Hall of Fame? We'll talk about that. We're also going to talk about another former 49er running back and whether he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame or not as well. But before we get to there, let's take a little bit of a look back at the first 3 weeks of free agency, because it's been now 3 weeks since it opened up as far as the legal tampering period and so on. And so the first topic that we're going to get into is, Rob, what reason do you have for optimism with the 49ers offense and where things stand at this point?
Yeah, if I'm looking at the offense and trying to say to myself, well, what is there to be optimistic for in 2022? I think that there are a fair number of things that we can choose from. But a broad scope topic that I wanted to hit that I think 49ers faithful really should keep in mind, to me, is the skill positions on offense. To me, you look at it in its entirety. The top performing skill positions are all there. The running back room returns essentially in full health from 2021. Obviously, one of the free agency misses for me was not signing back Raheem Mostert. But when you compare 2022 and the potential there to the 2021 season, obviously you only got a couple of plays out of Raheem Mostert. And I don't think that was the difference in the running back room. You're bringing back Elijah Mitchell. You're expecting big things from the return of Trey Sermon, hopefully the emergence of Trey Sermon. Jeff Wilson Jr. has been added back as another depth piece. And JaMychal Hasty still sits there as the third down back. And it's not to say I don't believe that room can't be improved, because I do, but I thought it was a very successful room for the 49ers in 2021, and it returns in 2022.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that piece. As far as, when you go back and you look at where the 49ers are, they only lost 31 yards of rushing from their attack last year. Mostert had 20. There was 12 yards from somebody who's not even around. He played one game for him, Jaquez Patrick. I think he was active for 2 games, and he's been gone since the middle of the season. And then Trenton Cannon, he had 1 carry for -1 yard. So a total of 31 yards there that they've lost in the running game. So not much. Like you said, they're all coming back. And the same thing in the receiving group. The only thing that they've lost there is they lost 264 yards of receiving. And that's from the loss of the 2 wide receivers that they've lost, Mohamed Sanu and
Travis Benjamin.
Travis Benjamin didn't actually have any receptions though.
That's right.
It wasn't him
until the playoffs.
Correct. I'm blanking on his name right now. It was the guy that was on Trent Sherfield.
Yes.
How could I forget Trent Sherfield? I even have him written down on my list right here. I just couldn't find it.
That's right. I mean, the man who brings his lunch pail to work.
Not only that, but he scored the first touchdown for the 49ers in 2021.
Right.
So, so they lost 31 total rushing yards, 264 total receiving yards. They've lost 1 touchdown that was scored. One touchdown was all that they've lost for the guys that are no longer with them. So that's one of the positives. The other positive that I have, a reason for optimism, is the transition from Jimmy Garoppolo to Trey Lance. I think that's the biggest reason. I think the most 49er fans should be. You combine the bringing back all the skill position players, the top skill position players, along with Trey Lance's ability, I think that helps him out and should go a long way to seeing him continue to grow from where we saw him go. We saw big growth from week 5 to week 17. If we continue to see that over the offseason into week 1 and beyond, it's going to be really good for that 49ers offense, I think.
Yeah, I would agree that Trey Lance is absolutely a reason for optimism. I also think that's where some of the frustration from 49er faithful is coming right now, is with the confusion created by Jimmy Garoppolo still being on the roster, still being a potential for being on the roster in 2022. That the fan base is seeing the potential undoing of one of the bigger, more optimistic pieces for 2022, right? I mean, this sort of botched trade has created an environment where you could see a competition. You could see Jimmy Garoppolo. I still believe these things are highly unlikely, but you could see Jimmy Garoppolo on the roster in 2022. And if that got in the way of Trey Lance getting the starting role, that would be a travesty.
I agree. That would be a big problem if for whatever reason, and we'll move on to the other because we're getting into the concern now. If there's some reason that that Trey Lance is not the starting quarterback and it's Jimmy Garoppolo, I think that should be a big reason for concern amongst the 49er fans, and it should be a reason for them to start to really question where this regime is headed. If Jimmy Garoppolo is in year 2 still better than where Trey Lance is, that's definitely one. So kind of like I said, I switched gears here as we moved on. What is your reason for concern offensively outside of possibly the whole deal with Jimmy Garoppolo maybe coming back?
Yeah, I do think that that's one that you have to take into account, the detriment of having Jimmy on the roster to the sort of mental health of this team, the mental health of the head coach, of the front office, of the new quarterback, of the entire offense. To me, that's definitely something that you have to keep your eye on. But I'm going to go with the low-hanging fruit on this one, Jack. To me, the biggest area of concern for the 49ers seems to be one that I have greater concern than they do. And that makes sense because they have a lot more information than I do. But I view it as the offensive line. I'm looking at it as 20% of it really feels like a sure thing. And that 20% is coming from a soon-to-be 34-year-old left tackle, right? So that feels locked down. But then left guard, it seems we're going to be relying on Aaron Banks to step in. And I'm optimistic there. I believe that there's reason to be optimistic, that there's enough evidence to feel like, hey, there's a good shot that Aaron Banks steps in, is able to contribute. But it seems like a heck of an unknown. Then you have Alex Mack. And I'm still leaning towards believing the language that's coming out. But I've got to pull up Eric Branch's recent tweet on the similarity between the language used for Joe Staley before it was announced he was retiring and the language for Alex Mack. So Eric Branch tweeted today, John Lynch on Joe Staley in 2020. We've kept in good contact. He's working out. We are encouraged that Joe's going to be a part of us. Lynch on Alex Mack in 2022. We've had really good communication. He's training. All signs are him being part of us. So both times, him being part of us was the ending statement. The first time that was used was on Joe Staley. We all know how that happened, how that played out. Thankfully, there was a move in the waiting. You could see the same thing happening here, but it's that unknown for me that sits there and makes me nervous. And then Daniel Brunskill is there at right guard, and he was the weak link in the 2021 season. So I don't feel all that great with the 20% of the line he's making up. And then obviously Mike McGlinchey coming off of a very serious injury. You just wonder if he's going to be set when the season's ready to roll. So to me, that 80% being unsettled, being somewhat unknown, being a leap of faith, that seems like the biggest cause for concern.
Yeah, I do agree with you that if you're looking for an area of concern on offense, it is the offensive line. That's definitely because of the unknown, like you said, at left guard. For me, when I look at this offensive line, the loss of Laken Tomlinson, I think, has been overstated a little bit. Laken Tomlinson's best attribute was his availability, not his ability,
Yes.
but his availability.
Iron Man.
Yeah, the question around Alex Mack, that's pretty valid as well. The reason that one, although it's a concern, might not be as big of a concern for me as it is for you or for some other folks, is just stop taking a step back and looking at the 49ers as a whole and what they were able to accomplish in 2020 when they basically went through the whole season without a center. There's the guy that they expected to be the starting center was hurt throughout. He didn't play much at all. And so they were juggling between Ronas Garasu and Daniel Brunskill, and just they were going through different guys at that position. They were constantly rotating in the middle there between guard and center. And yet that team still, if you go back and you look at the numbers real quick, if you look at the 2020 team and the 2021 team, both teams averaged 4.3 yards per carry. The difference in the sack percentage was 0.04. So last season in 2021, Jimmy Garoppolo was sacked 6% of the time that he dropped back to pass. In 2020, Garoppolo, Mullins, and Beathard averaged 6.4% of the time. Those two numbers are actually lower than Garoppolo's sack percentage in 2019 when they went to the Super Bowl. So they actually got better. So it's kind of interesting. So I guess the overall takeaway from it is when you look at the offensive line from 21, 20, and 19, really over the last 3 years when the 49ers have been decent, it hasn't really mattered a great deal who was in. They've always seemed to be able to kind of step up. So that's the only reason that gives me a little bit of a pause there to not push the panic button. It just seems like it doesn't matter who they have in. They have guys who are able to fill in or start if necessary across the offensive line that makes up for that. So.
Yeah, I do think that's an important piece to call out. I mean, it's pretty remarkable the fill-in job that the 49ers along the offensive line have been able to do, whether that's Kyle Shanahan and Mike McDaniel in years past being able to scheme around it, or whether that is literally coaching up players along the offensive line. I think you're right to call out the fact that they have gotten by in years past with some significant holes there. And, it's entirely possible. I say 80% is unsettled. As we get closer to the season, we will know for sure which of these are truly unsettled. I saw Swansung pointing out that there's a key difference between Joe Staley and Alex Mack. It may be the same language that's being used, but with Joe Staley, we knew that there was an existing injury there. The only thing I would say is with Alex Mack, there has been actual mention of pondering retirement, whereas Joe Staley, it really came out of left field as far as I was aware. So I do think that as we draw closer to the regular season, a lot of these question marks will become more solidified, and we'll be able to say definitively who's locked down and who's going to be a new offensive lineman at a key position. And I think you're right to call out that the 49ers have made do with some of those fill-ins before. And it's not as if Aaron Banks is just a fill-in. He was a second-round draft pick. This is his natural position he's going back to at left guard. So I agree that it's cause for concern for me, but I'm not terribly worried until I know a little bit more information as we draw closer to the season.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. We still have 4 months to go before we get there. There's a draft that's going to take place. We'll have a better understanding of what's happening with Alex Mack, because that is a little bit of a concern there. They have Jake Brendel, who they didn't have back in 2020 because he had opted out.
Right.
So they have a little bit more depth there at center. Brunskill could slide inside, because it does sound like they're talking about the possibility of Jalen Moore being a starter. So does he start at right guard? Does he start at right tackle? We'll get a lot of answers to these as we go through these next few months. But that's just kind of the direction that I see it headed right now for the 49ers.
Most definitely. And you do wonder, the addition of our new quarterback coming in, that's a mobile quarterback. It'll be interesting to see how that evolves the offensive line. I don't anticipate any type of a huge schematic shift, right? I think that you're putting a quarterback into an existing system and then evolving that system to match the skill set of the quarterback. But certainly you can point out that one thing is definitively clear, that Jimmy Garoppolo was not a mobile quarterback, and Trey Lance is far more mobile, and therefore there will be a difference in the style of play for the offensive line, even if schematically the offensive is very similar.
Yeah, there'll be some differences. Definitely. The one thing that you get with Trey Lance is that ability to move out of the pocket a little bit more. He really wants to stay inside, but he will move around a little bit more. Uh, so that will help. I think help that group out if necessary. So really quick before we move on, I see that we're starting to lose the chat room to, it looks like John Candy movies. They're on to Uncle Buck. Uh, Great, trains, planes, and automobiles. That's a great one. I mean, Bruce, you can't really fault them for liking Brewster's Millions. That's a really good one there as well. I mean, what is it? He needs to spend $30 million or $3 million in 30 days to win 30 million, or it's 30 million to get 300 million, some crazy number like that. I don't know if have you seen the Brewster's Millions movie?
I have. All of those that they're listing there are phenomenal movies. I would have to say it's tough not to put Uncle Buck number one there. Uncle Buck is just a great freaking comedy. And then Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. I'm a huge Steve Martin fan as well. So, you got John Candy, Steve Martin. It can't go wrong. Cannot go wrong. Those are not pillows, Jack.
No, yeah, those aren't pillows. And the other one is the what are you? You're like a Chatty Cathy doll, just pulling your own strings, right? That's the one that I've gotten myself in trouble a couple of times using that one with people that I shouldn't be using it towards. Let's just say that. But definitely some good movies over there. That's Spaceballs. No, Spaceball. I've seen Space. That we can keep that one out of the list. But let's move it on over to the defensive side really quick. We'll start off with the concern side on the defense. What is the biggest area of concern for you when you look at where the 49ers defense is currently?
To me, it's not a huge one. I'll be honest. But the biggest area of concern to me is this idea of getting cheap at the second safety spot. It really, to me, feels like a mistake to just simply have a competition between the three players that it seems the 49ers are attempting to decide between to play opposite of Jimmy Ward. Talanoa Hufanga, natural football player. I do worry if he's a step slow to play that position. I loved him in some of the formations where he came in and was able to play close down to the line of scrimmage, but covering a lot of ground is just something that I haven't seen him do on a regular basis. Tavarius Moore has that athleticism, has that ability to cover that immense amount of ground very, very quickly, but he, as a super athletic player, he's coming off of an Achilles injury. So the question mark becomes, is that skill set, is that athletic skill set neutralized by the injury? Typically, players take a little while to come back from that Achilles. And then lastly, they add George Odom to the mix, who an elite special teams player, and maybe the small sample size of seeing him starting at safety for the Colts was enough for the Niners to believe that he can do what they want him to do. He seemed to be a sure tackler, playing down inside the box. I know that's being a sure tackler is certainly something that the 49ers value playing in the secondary, but there's just no clear-cut player that seems like they're going to emerge, and it strikes me as, well, we're close up against the cap. We can't really afford to bring in one of these guys who would be a for sure starter, so let's just have a competition there. And I've seen what poor safety play for the 49ers can do, looking back at that Arizona Cardinals game where they had both Tart and Ward out, and that was an atrocious defensive effort in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is my biggest concern. There are a couple of concerns in the secondary. The safety one is a concern. If I was going to list two, it would be safety and the nickel cornerback position. Mm-hmm. Those are the two. The issue at safety, like you said, it's Jaquiski Tart is really good. You lose a little bit there with Talanoa Hufanga taking that spot. The one thing that I will point to is the 49ers are actually, there was 3 games in which Hufanga started in 2021. At Chicago, at home against Arizona, and then at home against the Rams. The 49ers were 2-1 in those games. So they were able to fare okay with them, but it's a small sample size. So you're kind of working off of that. Hufanga, I do believe that Hufanga is at his best when he can play around the line of scrimmage, and you kind of would keep Ward up high if that's the direction that they go. And that might be the direction that might be something that would work for them this season, given the addition of Travarius Ward. Ward gives you that ability to play a little bit more man coverage, a little bit tighter on that side, which could mean, not having to play so much soft coverage with the safety help over the top, and those types of things. So that's the one positive to the concern. But yes, safety would be one concern. The other, like I said, nickel corner. And it's really a matter of where do they go. Diamond Lenore is a guy who I feel can fill in that role of K'Wan Williams. When it comes to the run support piece, he's a pretty solid tackler. I think he'd be okay there. But does he have the coverage skills?
Right.
Beyond that, you're looking at Dante Johnson, Darquez Denard. That's the duo that played there week 18. Johnson's played in the slot a couple other times in his career. He's kind of a Mr. Do Everything for the 49ers. So I think we'll see them probably look to add a guy there in the draft. The other potential thing that they could do with that nickel spot would be playing more of a matchup coverage. If you're playing man coverage, maybe it's Travarius Ward that's following his man into the slot. Maybe it's Emmanuel Mosley. It just depends on. It'll be interesting to see if there are any changes to the 49ers defensive scheme with a guy like Ward now on the roster out at cornerback.
Yeah, when I look at the starters at cornerback, it seems like we have it pretty well solidified. When I look at any of those starters getting injured, so I loved Matthew Berry's suggestion that you could see some creative formations, much like the 49ers did back in 2011, where you had Carlos Rogers, who was playing outside, but then on the nickel downs, he would slide into the nickel position, and you would have the rookie Chris Culliver coming in and playing the outside. And that seems like a good fit for the 49ers this season as well, because they don't have a clear answer at nickel, as you're alluding to, Jack. But Emmanuel Mosley does have depth, does have experience there, can play the nickel very well. And so if he were to slide in on those third downs, you could then see a situation where Ambry Thomas comes in, and that still strikes me as a good starting unit, a good nickel coverage unit. But if you had an injury to Emmanuel Mosley, and then you were down to Diamador Lenore or Dante Johnson, at that point, it becomes a little sketchier. So I would agree with you, Jack, that I'll feel a lot better about this position once the 49ers bolster it. It doesn't necessarily need to be, I don't feel they need to add a Stephon Gilmore type of a player that comes in and immediately becomes that nickel cornerback. To me, I will feel better about this position when the 49ers have solidified it with just a little more depth so that they could withstand an injury, which is just a matter of time within the NFL.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And even if it's a rookie, I know there's a lot of folks that are really high on the cornerback out of, I think it's Marcus Jones, I think is his name, the cornerback.
I would be very high on him as well.
Yeah, out of Houston. I mean, that'd be a nice addition there. Plus the special teams play that he gives and all that kind of stuff. They'll give you maybe somebody to develop and be your long-term solution there for the next 4 years.
My big fear with him is size and the shoulder surgery. So, I saw him at the combine and he didn't run any of the drills because he had just had that second shoulder surgery. And you can put 2 and 2 together that he very clearly had 2 shoulder surgeries to remedy the fact that he is a very physical tackler, right? I mean, you can imagine that those surgeries were needed because of the damage he's done over time as an undersized tackler, but someone who's not afraid to stick his nose in there, much like Jimmy Ward early on in his career with the San Francisco 49ers, where you had someone who was a very physical tackler, sticks their nose in there, but then is subject to some of the injuries that come with that. So that's my only concern about Marcus Jones and the idea that the Niners invested in Ray McCloud. But I would absolutely love if they added him in the end of the third round, beginning of the fourth, wherever they need to get a hold of that guy. He seems like a value add to this 49ers roster.
Yeah, I think so as well. I think I think that would be a nice addition for the 49ers moving forward. And then that kind of leads us to the other side of it. So we talked about what were our concerns. So what leads you to be optimistic about what this defense can do here in 2022?
To me, it's the entire defensive front. I could go with the defensive line or the linebackers in this regard. I think that the Niners did a good job of retaining just enough depth to replace some of those players. So if we start with the defensive line, to me, the loss of DJ Jones, that could end up being bigger than a lot of people played it out to be. I realize that he only played roughly 50% of the snaps for the 49ers, and therefore many people said, well, you can't dole out that kind of money, the kind of money that DJ Jones got from Denver for a player that only contributes 50% of the snaps on defense. But it was and is my contention that regardless of the percentage of snaps, his ability with Eric Armstead, when they formed that tandem on the interior of the D-line to shut down the run game for opposing teams on early downs and put them into those third and long situations, to me, was of greater importance to the defense than the 50% snap count would imply. So I do think that's a loss, but is it offset by a successful surgery for Javon Kinlaw? And then Arden Key, big loss there. He was really coming on in the second half of the season, but you also had Samson Ebukam coming on in the second half of the season. You also have Charles Omenihu coming on in the second half of the season. So key depth there. And then obviously the return of Kerry Hyder. To me, I think the 49ers have done a good job of patching up that defensive line after a couple of key losses. And I'm pretty confident that it's still one of, if not the deepest defensive line rooms in the NFL.
Yeah, that's I think you hit it. That's the defensive line and the linebacker group both, right? The linebackers, we know that's solid. The linebacker group is solid. Those guys are all coming back. They added to it actually a little bit this year with Oren Burks, whose primary role most likely be on special teams, but they added a depth piece there as well. So we know linebacker is good, and I agree with you when it comes to that defensive line. I think that defensive line is going to be really solid. Yes, the loss of DJ Jones hurts in the run defense, but you're picking up in the pass on the pass defense side with the pass rush side with Javon Kinlaw and the other additions that they made there. That's one of the pieces is you got to remember when you lose DJ Jones, you're picking up Javon Kinlaw, and it's a little bit of a leap of faith to believe that Javon Kinlaw is going to be fully healthy. He says he is. He says he feels better. He also said that he wasn't hurt last year during training camp. So there's a little bit of a leap of faith to believe where he is right now, and we'll find out when we get to OTAs and mini camp and in early part of training camp. But if Javon Kinlaw is 100%, I feel like you pick up a little bit of a pass rush. You probably are about the same in terms of the run defense, maybe a little bit off there. But overall, the way that group works is pretty solid. Chris Kocurek, he just seems to turn these guys into gets these guys paid, right? We saw Arden Key, for example. He came in 3 seasons with the Raiders. He had 3 sacks. He had 6.5 last year. Kerry Hyder has done nothing outside of the 2 times that when he's played with Kocurek, whether it was in Detroit or here with the 49ers. So that's a big signing as well. I think that what we're going to see is obviously it's going to be both on one side. The question for me with the defensive line also is what is the role going to be of Eric Armstead? Is he going to be just playing defensive tackle, or is he going to get moved back to the outside and still be playing back and forth between inside and outside? Because that's the one thing that we don't know. Because for me, I feel like Eric Armstead is better when he's just an interior player. He doesn't set the edge very well in the run game, which is what his role is and why they like to play him out there to begin with. So if you're asking me, I go with Ebukam, I go with Armstead, Kinlaw, and Bosa as my starting group. And then I'm filling in with Jordan Willis and Omenihu and Hyder and the addition of Ridgeway to me is more of an addition to fill the role lost by the Contavious Street leaving. I think that those are I don't think they moved one for the other. I don't think Ridgeway was brought in to replace Jones is what I'm trying to say there. So definitely the defensive line and the linebacker groups should give you reason for optimism. That front seven is very strong.
It should. And I mean, most people still believe that the 49ers will continue to invest in that, right? Whether it is through one of the early picks in the draft in trying to bring in a speed edge rusher, that would be my personal preference. If you look at the list of available defensive tackles, there are still a fair number of 300 pounders out there who could come in and contribute. And certainly you would think any of those that are looking to take one of those late deals that comes out this summer, something that is a 1-year prove it deal that attempts to springboard them back into a multi-year contract to finish out their careers. You would think the 49ers and Chris Kocurek would be top of their list. You've seen countless players come in, get coached up, be a part of a wildly successful defensive line that has depth, that can attract some of those double teams, take them away from you. And you would think that some player might be tempted to sign with the 49ers. The only reason I would say that they don't sign one of those veterans is I look at this defensive line room and I already see 10 players on there that it looks like could be on any NFL's D lineman's roster and make the 53-man. And I still think they're going to draft somebody in the second or the third round. So to me, that's a crowded room. It would be difficult for a player to come in and contribute, a veteran, but you never know. Like I said, there are some big names still out there.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. And then real quick, before we move on, I do want to shout out a few folks. We have Aaron from 49ers First Takes. He says, hello, fellas. How you doing, Aaron? Good to see you.
Hello, Aaron.
And then from earlier on the show, we missed a few folks, so I'm going to pull them up here as well. E. Kim was in the house. He says, hey, guys, good to see you.
Hey, E. Kim.
Raphael 5629ers. What's up, Jack, Rob, and everyone? Good one. Raphael's always around. I really appreciate him. He's always in here as well.
Yes, Raphael's a good dude.
Yeah, there's a bunch of others, but let's jump into this topic that seems to be taking 49ers Twitter by storm today, and going to try to not get canceled like Vish is on his way to here. But Frank Gore, is he going to the Hall of Fame?
Absolutely, Jack. Absolutely. I would be willing to wager the Frank Gore signed jersey that is right over here on my wall. Frank is headed to the Hall of Fame. And let me say this, because I think that this to me is relevant not only to this conversation, but the one that will be coming as well. I believe that there's not one specific formula to get into the Hall of Fame. You might have been the best in the league for a period of time. It might even have been for a short period of time. But if you were far and away the best person in the league, even if for a short period of time, you can get into the Hall of Fame that way. You might have changed the game in some fundamental way. Your contributions led to an evolution in the NFL. And for that alone, you become a special player worthy of honoring, and you might get into the Hall of Fame that way. Or perhaps you're consistently one of the best in the league, and you're able to sustain that level of greatness for a long period of time. And that, to me, is Frank Gore. That, to me, is what Gore was able to do. He was one of the best in the league for a long period of time, and on many of those years on very bad 49ers teams.
Yeah, for sure. And Chris Royal, he put this up right at the beginning of the show, and I just haven't shown it yet because we hadn't gotten to the topic. But thank you very much, Chris, for the donation. He says Frank should be, but unlikely to be first ballot. And I agree with him. I do believe that Frank Gore should make it to the Hall of Fame. I believe he will make it to the Hall of Fame. I don't think he's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, but I believe that he'll get in before his time through the regular channels with the way that they do it finishes up. I don't think it's going to have to go to the Veterans Committee or any of those other things. I think he'll get in with the regular voting that we see take place every year. Because at the end of the day, when you look at it, Frank Gore, he never was an All-Pro. I don't think he ever led the league in rushing, but he had some big time seasons. Here's a guy who he was, what was that? I think there was 2 times in his career where he had over 1,000 yards 4 times. So that goes from his second year through his 5th year. In 2010, he dropped off, but then in 11 through 14, I wonder what was going on around that time, 11 through 14. Were they good at that point? I don't remember. But they were, he got over 1,000 yards then again there. And then the 49ers let him go. His first year in Indianapolis, he almost got to 1,000. Actually, all 3 years that he was in Indy, he got over 1,000 once, but he was right there 2 other times. So he was really close. And I definitely believe that Frank Gore is a Hall of Fame worthy player.
Yeah, I think that, to me, the accrual of stats, the overall accrual of stats throughout one's career is something that has to be respected within the league. And I think is respected within the league. People who have played the game understand how hard it is to play the game at an elite level for any considerable amount of time. The idea that Frank came into the league with those horrific lower leg injuries, the knee injuries, and then was able to maintain his health throughout is honestly, I think, something that Hall of Fame voters and ex-players will respect at a level that some fans may not understand. In particular, some fans outside of San Francisco. I think 49er faithful are very aware of how special Frank Gore was to the 49ers and to the league as well. When I look at his stats, I mean, a lot of this has been flying around. This one, I think, came out from NBC Sports. But most consecutive seasons with 1,200 scrimmage yards in the NFL, Frank Gore leads that list, 12 all-time in NFL history, ahead of Barry Sanders. Frank Gore had 12, Barry Sanders 10, Emmitt Smith 10, Curtis Martin 10, Jerry Rice 9. What's the common theme with those 4 other players on that list? They are all in the Hall of Fame. So the famous saying of, tell me who else is on that list, and I'll tell you how important that statistic is. In this one, when you're naming Barry Sanders, Emmitt Smith, Curtis Martin, Jerry Rice, and Frank Gore is at the top of that list, that's one hell of a statistic, right? To be in the most consecutive seasons with 1,200 yards from scrimmage. That's wild to me. And then every other non-active player who ranks in the top 10 for all-time rushing yards in the NFL has been inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Frank Gore sits at 3rd on that list. So I think there's a chance he's a first ballot. I think there's a chance he gets in first ballot. But I think that it's more probable that you're right, that it takes a couple of years to play out because of that fact that he wasn't all pro. He did lead the NFC in rushing yards in 2006, but did not lead the league in rushing during his career. And so I think it's fair to say that he may not make it that first ballot.
Yeah. And I think it is, it is also, I'd mentioned the fact that he was never named to the all-pro team.
Mm-hmm.
Because he wasn't, but I think it's important to note that he was a second team All Pro. He was a second team in 2006. He was a second team All Pro. When you're talking about All Pros, that gets a little tricky because most people only it's kind of like wins and losses. People only want to pay attention to the guys that are either winning or losing or in first, right? They don't care about second place is the first loser, right? So if you're on the second team, it's not the same as being a first teamer. So that's why when you see people talking about it, that's the way they look at it. They'll say he wasn't an all pro because he wasn't a first team. But yeah, that 2006 season was special, and I agree. I think that he deserves to be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and we'll see. We got 5 years. It'll probably be about, I think, maybe 6 or 7 years before we see him in Canton.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It might take that long. Speaking of the 2006 season, this stat comes from Jordan Elliott, who pulled this out, and I think it gives good perspective on how special that season was. So in 2006, Frank finished 3rd in total rushing yards, despite the fact that he was 9th in rushing attempts. So there were 10 backs that had 300 plus rushing attempts. Frank Gore led all of them with a 5.4 yard average, which was higher than LaDainian Tomlinson, who ended up winning the MVP that season. So, I mean, just a special year in 2006. Obviously, some elite backs playing throughout the league that year. But to me, I think you have to take into account, again, the fact that he was able to do it over a long period of time. I thought Joe Shasky had a great tweet about this as well, saying Frank Gore had 11,000 plus rushing yards and 65 touchdowns in 10 seasons with horrific offensive line play, horrific quarterback play, archaic offensive play designs, putrid playmakers against stacked boxes weekly, down big every week. Guy never complained once publicly. Class personified. I think there's some hyperbole in there. I think there's some exaggeration in there, but there's also some truth in there, right? There really is. I think if you measured the percentage of running into a stacked box with 8 men or more in the box, I would bet that Frank Gore would lead the league in rushing yards per carry going into a stacked box, because he just ran so low to the ground. His ability to sort of tilt his body and get low, run low, avoid tackles was so key. And he was just always getting 4 or 5 yards per carry, even when it was rough sledding into stacked boxes.
Yeah, no, he was. It was amazing when you watch Frank Gore run. The number of times when you see him hit the line, and it just seemed like there was nowhere to go. All of a sudden, you just kind of see him squirt through, and he's gone. I mean, his ability to get through the hole and kind of get skinny through the hole, I guess what they say when they talk about running backs. That's kind of a term you hear. But his ability to do that and stay low and run through, I think it's the best that we've ever seen with the 49ers, outside of maybe I just mentioned his name the other day. What was his name? The guy who played in 1998. He broke his ankle in Atlanta. You know who I'm talking about.
You're talking about Garrison Hurst?
Garrison Hurst. Yes.
Yes.
I think that the next. I think when I watched Frank Gore play, there's a lot of similarities to Garrison Hurst and their ability to break out through the line of scrimmage and hit that hole and just kind of be small through the hole, shoulders level, run through people, and then once they get out past the line of scrimmage, be able to be physical and outrun people down the field. I think those two are very similar, but Frank Gore did it for a very long time, whereas Garrison Hurst had those knee injuries that he had to deal with throughout his knee, and he had some knee injuries as well, and then he had the ankle injury that kind of ended his career.
Yeah, and again, I don't think it should be forgotten that people took Frank Gore off of their draft boards, right? I mean, storylines matter to me. And I think they matter in these types of situations where you're looking at the legend of someone's career. You're looking at the story of what they were able to do within the NFL. And the simple fact that Frank Gore appeared to be damaged goods coming into the league, and then his strongest trait was his ability to continue to play, to continue to contribute, I think speaks volumes to the amount of heart that is encased in Frank Gore's chest.
Oh yeah, no, if you could take Frank Gore's heart and give a little piece of that to all the 49ers moving forward, that would be a good thing. That's for darn sure.
Yes, it would. Yes, it would.
All right, so we both have Frank Gore going into the Hall of Fame. That's fantastic. There's another 49er running back that a lot of people like to discuss about his Hall of Fame worthiness, and it's Roger Craig, number 33, the high stepper himself. Where do you fall on Roger Craig? Do you think he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame?
I do, Jack, and I understand that this one to me is a more contentious argument. This one to me is less clear cut than Frank Gore. Frank Gore, I honestly believe there's a chance he makes it in as a first ballot Hall of Famer. Obviously, that's not the case with Roger Craig, and it's still a question mark as to whether he'll make it in or not. But I see this as I go back to what I talked about. There are different formulas that you can follow to get into the Hall of Fame. And this doesn't fall into the being best in the league for a period of time, although you could argue there were a couple of seasons, 2 in particular, for Roger Craig, where you could make a very strong argument, in my belief, that he was best in the league in those 2 seasons. I think it's the second one for me. I know that he doesn't fall into the consistent over a long period of time that Frank does, but it's the second one where he kind of change the game in some fundamental way. Now, it's an argument as to whether it's his skill set and his ability or whether it was Bill Walsh and his West Coast offense. I think you can't really have one without the other, right? You may have a particular offense designed to do something, but if you don't have a player that can execute what you want to do, then it doesn't work in quite the same way. When I look at some of the resume of Roger Craig, to me, it's impressive enough in combination with the fact that, he was the first person to hit the 1,000-yard club, 1,000-yard receiving, 1,000-yard rushing. To me, that was sort of an evolution in the game in the West Coast offense, and he epitomized it to me.
Yeah. So real quick, before we jump on, before I give you my answer on this one, I did want to just real quick throw up, where is it? I don't want to throw up, but I want to put up a comment from, where is he? Gosh darn it. I just lost it. You see, this is what happens when you're doing live shows, right? You're doing it and you got a really good comment that you want to bring up, but here we go. Ellen chimes in. He says, Jack and Rob, happy Monday. Happy Monday to you as well, Ellen. Says, so glad that Gore, going back to our previous topics, retiring as a 49er. Do you think they retire his number? Smash that like button like Gore hit the hole. I think there's a pretty good chance that he's going to retire. I saw on Twitter somebody mentioned that they're not allowing the younger players who are coming along or free agents to use 21. I think that might be preparation for the time when they finally decide to retire it.
I think that they should. I know Jed has said, like, hey, this is the 49ers. We already have X number of numbers retired. Like, you only have a certain number of numbers in the 0 to 99 range. And so you can't necessarily retire them all. Frank, to me, is so well loved amongst the faithful. I mean, there just really isn't someone of his stature for that length of time that won over the hearts and the minds of the faithful in the way that Frank Gore did. Sure, you could point to Joe Staley. Sure, you could point to Patrick Willis. But I think in both of those cases, they would fall behind Frank Gore as far as importance to most of the fan base throughout that period of time and their contributions on the field. So I could see a situation where the Niners do sort of make an exception there and retire Frank's number. Yeah,
I agree. And then to jump back over here to our current conversation on Roger Craig, you think that he should be in, and I'm going to disagree. I don't feel like what he did was enough to get himself into the Hall of Fame. I understand, like you said, he's the first player to go 1,000, which I get that. But the issue when it comes to that is that's in the Hall of Fame. Roger Craig is in the Hall of Fame for hitting 1,000. That accomplishment has already been recognized by the Hall of Fame. But when you look at him as a player, I know us out here as fans, I love Roger Craig, but is he one of the best running backs in the history of the game? I don't think so. And here's the reason why. When you start to look through what he did, Craig played 11 years in the NFL. He was only over 1,000 yards as a rusher three times in 88 or 85, excuse me. That was the year that he did the 1,000, and then 88 and 89. Those are the only times that he was a 1,000-yard rusher in 12 years. And so I think that really hurts him. The other thing that I've heard when you bring up the discussion of Roger Craig is, well, if Marshall Faulk made it into the Hall of Fame, Roger Craig deserves to as well. There's a big difference, though, between those two, because when you look at what Marshall Faulk did, Marshall Faulk was over 2,000 all-purpose yards 4 years in a row. He was at 2,200 in one season, 2,400 the next season, and then just under 22, and then 2,150 the last year. Those were three of his the three times that he was an All-Pro. The first year, it's funny because I had this conversation earlier today with somebody about the whole All-Pro thing. Is All-Pro kind of a popularity contest like the Pro Bowl is? And I told them no, but it usually takes them a year to figure it out, right? Because that one's voted on by the writers. It usually takes them a year.
Right.
And here's, Falk is an example of this. He went over 2,200 yards in 1998 when he was in Indianapolis. That put him on the radar of the writers, but it wasn't until the next year when he was in St. Louis when he went over 24 that he actually got the recognition. And the other thing too, when you look at what Marshall Faulk did, Marshall Faulk was over 1,000 yards a number of times, 7 times in his career. So when you compare the two, there's a lot of difference between Marshall Faulk and Roger Craig. Really like Roger Craig. He deserves to be in the 49ers Hall of Fame, the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I don't agree with that one. I think that he is a player who, again, he deserves to be honored by the 49er faithful for what he did as a 49er, but as an overall Hall of Famer, no. And as you mentioned, his career, his 1,000 stands alone because he was the first one to do it. But he only did that once, and that is in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, and to me, I would agree that those statistics for Marshall Faulk are more impressive. And to me, that warrants why Marshall Faulk is in the Hall of Fame already and why Roger Craig is still sitting on the outskirts looking in. But I do see him as that fringe player that deserves to get in there in the long run because of the combination of factors. When I go through the entirety of his career and look at all things combined, you look at, he did make the Pro Bowl 4 times, right? 86, 88, 89, 90, all pro in 88, second team all pro or all at NFC in 85, 87, 89. When he retired, his 8,100 plus rushing yards ranked him 13th all time in career rushing yards. 566 career receptions was 19th best overall. And he scored 56 rushing touchdowns, 17 more in receiving touchdowns. He had a phenomenal rookie season where he came in 725 yards rushing, 8 rushing touchdowns, caught 48 passes for 427 yards. And then in big moments, right? Super Bowl 19 against Miami, just down the street from my old house at Stanford Stadium, Roger Craig scored 3 touchdowns, 2 receiving, 1 rushing, as we stomped the Dolphins 38-16. That was in his second season. And then in his third season, he sets history with the first 1,000-yard rushing, 1,000-yard receiving season. Career high 92 receptions that year, leading the league in receptions for the year. And then in 88, in 1988, established a 49ers record with over 1,500 yards rushing, which I found fascinating in the 49ers. It was calling out in this article I was reading, that the 49ers posted a league best 10-6 record. That's something that I forget, that in 88, the Niners were league best at 10-6. But that did end up with another Super Bowl victory, and he ends up with over 13,000 yards from scrimmage over his career. So you have to piece it all together, and it's a little thing here, it's a little thing there. But to me, when you paint that entire collage of his career, that balances out to me to get into the Hall of Fame. It's a fringe Hall of Fame career, but to me, it is a deserving Hall of Fame career nonetheless.
Yeah, I hear where you're going. I mean, you also can look at Roger Craig, and there's so many highlights. Obviously, the run down in Los Angeles being one of them. When he breaks through the line, runs over a bunch of people, and he's dragging guys to the goal line. That's a highlight that you can't. If you're a 49er fan, you have to make sure you see that one. There was also in 88, I believe it was, in the playoff game against Minnesota. I'm pretty sure it was 88. He had the long run down the left sideline, running right towards your seats to put that game away in the playoffs. So it was one of the games against the Vikings. I think it was the 88 playoffs that occurred. So definitely, he definitely had his moments. I just like I said, I said where I feel like he falls. And then,
yeah.
Did you say that in 88 they had the best record? Is that what somebody you heard?
Yeah, that was in the article that I read. I didn't go back to independently verify it, but in 1988 they quoted the 49ers as having the league best 10-6 record.
Yeah, they were it wasn't the league best, but they ended up with they ended up winning the division, but they didn't have the league best record. There was a couple of teams that were above them. And then the way that the playoffs just fell, they ended up getting to play both games at home because the Rams were the wild card team, and the Rams had made it through to the NFC Championship game. Actually, no, I'm sorry. In 88, they went to Chicago for the NFC Championship game. So I think Chicago was 12-4 that year. But still, it was that. Real quick before we jump off of this, I will say that the 1988 team, we talked about this. I think we've talked about this a couple of different times, but the 88 team, this season's team reminded me a lot of 1988. And I posted this earlier today on Twitter. But if we're going to talk about that 1988 team, you can't talk about that team and also not talk about another guy who's not going to ever make it to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but he made it into the NFL, the 49ers Hall of Fame this year, and that's John Taylor.
Yes.
You know, that season that he had in 1980, it's funny because you look back, if you go and you look at John Taylor's numbers, he only had, I think, 21 receptions that entire year, including postseason. But he had 3 of the biggest plays for the 49ers that year. He had the long kickoff return against Washington on Monday Night Football, where you see he has the double back. He picks the ball up on the 5, and then he jumps over a guy and runs down the sideline for a touchdown. And then in I think it was week 14 against the New Orleans Saints, he catches the pass from Joe Montana. He takes it 66 yards down the sideline, the left side, again, at your seats, for a touchdown that proved to be the game winner. And then obviously it was the touchdown catch at the end of the Super Bowl when he actually lined up at left tackle or left at tight end on the left side. He wasn't even out as a wide receiver for that one.
God, I look for throwback John Taylor jerseys. I really want one. I mean, he is my favorite unsung hero from those teams. I was a big John Taylor fan. I remain convicted that if he were on any other team that didn't have Jerry Rice as wide receiver 1, that he would get significantly more credit for what he was able to do within the league. And yeah, just looking back, I don't know how this site, which was from the Pro Football Hall of Fame, that listed that 10-6 as best. There were like 4 or 5 other teams that were above that, just looking back. A quick fact check would have gotten my facts straight, Jack. Thankfully, your memory of those years is significantly better than mine. So you're able to pull it off the top of your head.
See, that's okay. I've got the General Cat over here screaming at me because I said that Roger Craig doesn't belong in the NFL Hall of Fame. He's fully on your side. He's now yelling that John Taylor had better numbers. Here, let me pull it up. Let me do it in John Taylor had better numbers than Len Swan and John Stallworth. And he's correct. He did. But you also got to remember, I mean, how much did they throw the ball in Pittsburgh back in the days of Len Swan and John Stallworth? I mean, right.
Yeah, a little bit different. Bit different.
But he's right. He is right. He did. John Taylor had better numbers than both of those guys. Yeah, the whole John Taylor thing is funny because I think there's a whole group of 49er fans who never watched the 49ers live during those years and don't really know who John Taylor is, and they just see the stats and they're like, yeah, it's not that impressive. But if you really watched him play, he was really something.
He really was. And that's the other thing that I'll end on my comment on Roger Craig is anyone who hasn't seen him play, who's watching this and who hasn't seen the infamous high stepping, the high knees of Roger Craig, go back and watch it. It is worth the replays. Yeah,
no, for sure. No, Roger Craig's a tremendous player. I just, we just have a little bit of a difference of opinion on this. We're neither one is going to, we're not. And it's not like I'm saying, he doesn't even deserve consideration. I think he does.
No,
I just don't believe
I'm fringe in, you're fringe out. It's a minor difference.
Yeah, and I think that's the reason why he's not getting in is what we talked about. So. Anyway, yeah, that was fun. I think we solved most of the 49ers problems. If you watch tonight's show, you shouldn't be fretting too much throughout the rest of the next few months of the offseason, or at least until the draft comes along. We let you know the positives, the negatives, and it's going to be fun trying to figure out some topics for next week, Rob.
Yes, indeed, it will.
But thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Everybody over in the comment section, you guys were quite lively. Definitely go check out Trains, Planes, and Automobiles if you haven't seen it.
Yes, and Uncle Buck. 2 classics. Absolutely classics.
Absolutely. Now, as far as your channel, do you have anything going on this week?
Yes, I will be on tomorrow with my 49ers mailbag. That tweet goes out in the morning from the left shoe on Twitter, and I asked for my 49ers question submissions. You can also hit me at 49ersmailbag@gmail.com if you want to put in a question for the live mailbag. The live mailbag will happen tomorrow night at 5 p.m.
Awesome. 5 o'clock tomorrow. Make sure you're over there for Rob on the mailbag. And also get over to his channel. If you're not already subscribed, get over there and do that. Meanwhile, while you're here, like it says at the top of the screen, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you're not already subscribed, and hit the little bell notification so you know when we go live. I'll be back tomorrow night with another show and try to keep things rolling for you guys throughout the off season. It's going to be fun, and I'm looking forward to seeing where this thing goes. So thanks a lot, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Monday night, and we'll talk to you soon. There you go.